everybody. I'm Phyllis McCoy, and I am an alcoholic. Thank you, thank you, Glenn, for inviting me to share my experience, strength, and hope today. I hope I can do what I'm supposed to do. On page, I believe it's 19 in the big book, it says our members tell in a general way and from their own point of view how they have established a, a guide of their understanding, and I hope to do that. I grew up in a small town on a farm, and those of you who know anything about a farm, you have a lot of chores to do, and there's always something to be done. I My mother and father were really hardworking people, and they taught me right from wrong. And my father was an oil field worker and a farmer, so when he was doing his other job, that left us, mother and us kids, to pick up the pieces at the farm. I had a pretty normal childhood, with the exception of one thing. I was the only child for 6 years, and then the other siblings started coming along, and guess who I resented? My mother. I wasn't enough. You know, Selfishness and self-centered at 6 years old. Can you believe it? And it grew from there. But we had a terrible, terrible relationship. I was just a real brat growing up, and we just never got along. I was a daddy's girl, and he'd take me hunting and fishing, and I just thought the world and all of him. I had a normal childhood, played basketball, do all the things kids do. At 14, I got a work permit, and I started to work every summer in Bartlesville. And I did that every summer until I was 17, and then I met Mr. Right. I fell head over heels in love, and my father was dead set against me having a relationship, and I wanted to get married. I finally talked him into it, and we were married. And they shipped my husband. He was in the service off to California and then to Germany. So I went to my father and I said, I want to go to Germany. And he tried to talk me out of it, but I was headstrong. I went to a travel agency and booked a flight. I went to Germany. Well, I actually went to France on the SS United States, America. And I was going to live happily ever after. Fast forward 2 years, we were back in the States, and my little girl, Gail, was born when I was 19. And my parents didn't go to church, nor had they taken me to church, but when she was born, I just knew there was a creator. She was just so perfect, and I was so happy. Everything was just wonderful. And when she was about 3, my husband wanted a divorce, and my whole world fell apart. I and my father, who I thought the world of, was killed in a car accident at 47 years old, and it just like my whole world, it just fell apart. I moved to the big city of Tulsa, Oklahoma, and I was with my little girl, who's now 3, and I was scared to death, not only of the responsibility of having her, but in the big city. I enrolled in John's Business College and took accounting, got a little job, got a little bit better job. I just existed. And my husband now had remarried, and he came over and get Gail one evening, and he said, "You need to go out and see people and do things." And he said, we'll keep Gail anytime you want to go. So that evening, and it changed my whole life. I walked into a loud, noisy neighborhood bar, and I started drinking. And it was just like magic. That whole room changed. I changed. More importantly, it took away my pain. I felt part of life at last, just like Bill W. And I think that very night I acquired the solution to my pain and my problems. the obsession of the mind. I didn't know it, but I did that every chance I got. And then he came to me and he said, Phyllis, anytime you want to go out, he said, you can, but he said, my wife has a daughter the same age as Gail, and they get along real good. Why don't you let us keep Gail, and you can have her whenever you want, and I don't have to pay child support. Well, that sounded like a good idea. However, in being honest today, I realized that I wanted to drink more than I wanted to stay home. So I climbed on that merry-go-round of alcoholism and ran around with a big group of people. We drank and played hard. I married one of those men, and we didn't change a thing. One night we were sitting in a bar and we got into an argument, and I said to the couple at the table, if I had some wheels, I would just leave that guy. And he said, do you have $100? And I said, no, but why? I can get $100. He said, well, let's go get you a car. Now, that sounded like a good idea to me. So we get in the car and go to a different state, and it was a great big parking lot. I don't know where we were, but there were a lot of cars. And he switched the license plate. He wired the car up, and I get in it, and off I go. And after a while, I stop, and she gets in the car with me to keep me awake, and we visit, and we're going along, and it's mist and rain. I didn't know it was freezing. And we go across this bridge. And all of a sudden, the car started fishtailing, and I started fighting with the wheel. And I got it straightened up, but I was on the wrong side of the road. I ran straight head on into this pickup. And they told me that it burst into flames and went over this embankment. And this man was thrown clear, I learned, from the car. And it momentarily knocked me out, but when I came to, I felt for her, and she wasn't in the car. She too was thrown out of the car. The police came, the highway patrol came, and took us all to the hospital. And I thought, oh my, I've killed all these people. What have I done? He didn't bother to tell me. He was so mad at me that he'd had the car towed away that night. And when my mother came the next morning, I told her what I'd done, and she couldn't believe it. Well, neither could I. And you know, they never, ever found out about that car. Of course, I knew what I had done, and I was so ashamed. My husband had had all of me he could take, so he took me back to the farm, of all places. My resentment with my mother, because I hadn't bothered to go home on holidays. I spent my holidays in the bar. But anyway, I loved being with the kids and getting acquainted with the brothers and sisters. And eventually I talked him into coming after me, and he came after me. And I told myself that I was going to have to straighten up, that I was losing control of my drinking, and I didn't know why, didn't know what was going on. I walked into another bar one night, and at the end of the bar was sitting a guy like this at the end of the bar. Someone introduced us, and it was Joe. I said, gee, Joe, you look like my third husband. He said, gee, how many have you had? And I said, two. He stayed plumb away from me for a while, but one night I left the bar at closing time, and Joe was passed out in his car. And I knocked on the window, and I said, Joe, I'll drive you home, and someone can follow me and bring me back to my car. And that's what happened. And then he had to speak to me, and we got acquainted, and we started dating, and about a year later we were married. We didn't go to our neighborhood bar that night, but we went to another one, and we didn't change a thing. Drank every night, and we go along, and now my daughter is 11, and she wants to come and live with us. And I said, Joe, we've been drinking way too much, And I would love to have a chance to be a family and be a good mother. And he said, you're right. You're absolutely right. So he bought a little cabin on Grand Lake. And I would go to the liquor store every Friday and get our booze and mix up a little jug of ice water. And we'd pass that back and forth. And by the time we got to Grand Lake, we'd be drunk. And that's the way we raised my daughter. She couldn't wait to get away from us. She graduated when she was 16 and married when she was 17. And now it's all his fault. We're not getting along at all. And, you know, the trouble begins. And we decided that we would split up Tulsa. He would take the north and west part of Tulsa, and I would take the south and east part. Well, occasionally we'd run into each other, and of course there was other people involved, and that wasn't working out. We were married in 1967, and we were divorced in June of 73. And in November of 73, Joe calls me and he said, Phyllis, I'd like to come over and have a cup of coffee. He said, I found out that I'm an alcoholic and I'm going to AA and I'm not drinking. I thought, big deal, you know. Anyway, I said, okay. So he came over, and when I opened that door, I could see there was something very different about Joe. His eyes were different, and he was my Evie. But he came in and he told me that what was going on. And then he called and asked if he could come over again. And he did. And he said, you know, my sponsor and I are going, and his wife and a couple of AA women are going to Shreveport, Louisiana to a conference. Would you like to go? Well, heck no, I didn't want to go, but I heard myself say yes. Well, they picked me up and we went to Shreveport. And that night, going through the lobby, there was a bar over there with the lights and the atmosphere. And I thought, gee, I need a drink for this. But they're not drinking, and I won't either. I went to that meeting, and that lady started sharing. Her name was Marion M. I've never heard of her since. She was from Florida. And I started crying. Now, you couldn't make me cry. I became so hard and cold and hard-hearted. But she made me cry. I was so embarrassed. And on the way home, Edna, Joe's sponsor's wife, said, Phyllis, why don't you come and join us for Al-Anon sometime? And I said, okay, I would. And I think eventually I went to 2 or 3 meetings at Al-Anon, and then I'd go to the bar afterwards. And then one time, one of the ladies said to me, Phyllis, did it ever occur to you that you might be in the wrong program? Well, that really made me mad. I thought, what the heck does she know about drinking? She doesn't even drink. Well, I didn't know anything. I mean, I was dumber than a skunk, as Joe used to say. But anyway, we started dating again, and I'd go to open meetings with him on Friday night. Now, I knew I had a problem, but I didn't want to be an alcoholic. I couldn't imagine not drinking, even though it wasn't working like it used to work. We went back together in June of 1974. And his sponsor said, Joe, that's not a good idea. She's still drinking. And he said, well, she's agreed to quit her job, because that was my security. It's the only security I ever had. It wasn't certainly in marriage. And she's going to stay. She agreed to stay out of the bars. Now, he didn't say anything about not drinking. He said stay out of the bars, and I had agreed to that. Well, the first time I get mad and we have an argument, you know what I do? I go back to the bar. And this went along, and he said, what's going on with you? What is happening? And I said, well, it's because I have so much time on my hands. I need more to do. And he said, the kids need something to do, so I'm going to buy this Coney Island. And all you have to do is keep the books and go out and get the money. Well, that sounded like a good idea. Well, my son-in-law hated the Coney Island and didn't want to work there, so that meant Phyllis had to go to work and pay for the Coney Island. So I went to work at the Coney Island, and I felt like I was in jail. Joe would come out every evening and help us with the evening meal, and then he would go to meeting every night. He'd go to meeting. So I would lock the door and start drinking. And things went from bad to worse. He never knew how he was going to find me when he came home. What I thought was so repulsive in the end of Joe's drinking, we'd get on these crying drunks. Well, guess what? Now I was. And I couldn't understand what the heck was happening. We decided to sell the business. That evening we went to a meeting, and I'd been to a lot of conference with Joe, and I'd talked to Alabama Carruthers about my drinking. And she said, you either are or you aren't. And she said, no normal person ever has to entertain the idea of whether they're an alcoholic or not. Think about that. And this Friday night, we went to this meeting, and it was just like I felt myself, or watched myself, get up and go up there and get a desire chip. And then I thought, my gosh, what have I done? I couldn't imagine my life with or without alcohol. I was very unhappy. I'd go to those meetings, and at that time, they had those phrase classes, which is step 1, 2, 3, and they never read the big book. It was someone had taken paragraphs out of the big book, and when you went in that night, you would get a card, and that you would read that card. There was no consistency to it. And I was sober, going to a lot of meetings. I went to a meeting sometimes morning, sometimes noon, but always in the evening we'd go to a meeting. And I really thought that you would fix me. I thought I was doing the deal by going to a lot of meetings. And everything should have been great. We were building a new home, and Joe was sober and happy. And one night I decided to go to the furniture store, and it was closed. So I kind of missed my old friends at the bar, and I thought, well, I'll just go by the bar and say hi with no thought of drinking. I walked in my old neighborhood bar, and she set me up a drink. And I vaguely sensed I wasn't being too smart. But I drank that, and I closed the bar. And I was so glad Joe was asleep when I got home. And the next day, I was so ashamed. I told him what I'd done. And I didn't understand, because I had walked in that bar with no intention of drinking. And he said, well, I'm not surprised. He said, you haven't done anything but sit in a chair and take up a seat. You've not got a sponsor. You've not worked the steps. All you've done is go to a few meetings. And he said, you can sit in a chicken house from now on, and it won't make you a chicken. And I thought about what he said. And I conceded that everything he said was true. And if I wanted to stay sober, I couldn't do it like I was doing it. I couldn't do it by myself. I had no defense against that drink without a program. So I got a sponsor, and I really picked someone just as angry as I was, even though she'd been in a long time. We talked about the steps, and I think I did a 4-step with her, and it was all gloom and doom. It was all guilt, shame, and remorse. And it was about this time that Joe went to a meeting in Shangri-La. Joe McC was doing a film, Disease or Disgrace. And he came back to the group, and he said, he asked the chairman that night, what is this thing about the disease? And I never will forget, he said, hell, Joe, you're making too hard terms of this. Just worry about getting sober. Of course, we knew later that he didn't really know, because they weren't studying the doctor's opinion. They had never talked anything about the doctor's opinion. And Joe became a student of the Big Book, and we met Joe and Charlie in 1977. We'd all sit around a hotel room and listen to Joe and Charlie spoon feed the Big Book to us. And they went and did a little some recordings of 4 tapes in Lawton, Oklahoma. And Joe asked the group, he said, can we play those tapes? And it was 13 to 12 that we could. And we played those little tapes, and they came from all over the Tulsa area to listen to them. And we knew that this was the answer, the Big Book. So in 1978, we started, 7 of us, started the original West Side group, and that's the group I'm still a member of. But getting back to my story, my sponsor at that time went out, and I was listening to Joe and Charlie now, and I got another sponsor, and she was really involved in service. As a matter of fact, she was Joe's service sponsor. And we started on the steps. And I said, you know, Elizabeth, I don't really care about this God bit. I think God has laid this all out for me, and it's all his fault. And she said, oh, no, Phyllis, that's not the way it is. You made decisions all your life to do and be what you are today. Anyway, she gave me directions to get every morning when I woke up to go in the bathroom and ask God to keep me sober and thank him for what he'd given me and read that 24-hour book. And that's what I did. And we started on the steps. And when we got to step 4, by that time, I was doing the columns. And I could understand for the very first time that I had made decisions on self that later put me in a position to be hurt. And it wasn't those people I resented. It wasn't the who, why, the basic instinct, yes, what had been affected, and what did I do, and where was I selfish, self-centered, inconsiderate, dishonest. All those things I could see for the very first time. And I really and truly wanted to be different. And so that prepared me but when I did the 5th step with her, something happened inside. It explains it perfectly to me in the spiritual experience. It says, with few exceptions, our members find they have tapped an unsuspected inner resource, which they presently identify with a power greater than themselves. Our more religious members call it God consciousness. Now, I'm not a more religious member, but that's certainly what I call it, God consciousness. It was just like after I had uncovered and discovered all that crap in me, that this little spirit or this little consciousness just awakened. I think I've always had it because I knew right from wrong from the very beginning. But you see, I remember what I think it was Lauren Bacall said, if you follow all the rules, you miss all the fun. And I had not followed all the rules. So therefore, I had put myself in a position to be hurt many, many times. So I wanted to do 6 and 7. I wanted to be different. And I remembered what Joe McC said in step 6. Don't do what you want to do. You have to do what you don't want to do so that you can do what you want to do. And I did. I fully conceded to that 7th step. My Creator, I'm now willing that you have all of me, the good and the bad, and that you remove from me every single defective character that stands in my way of usefulness to you. Grant me strength as I go out to to do your bidding. Amen. I love that prayer. I love the third step prayer even more, the bondage of self. I could see that I had been selfish, self-centered all of my life. It was all about me. And you were teaching me that it was to give of myself. I think I was 9 months sober when I got my first sponsee, and I did everything wrong. I mean, I moved her. I took her to Arkansas to treatment. I did everything wrong. You know why? Because I wasn't reading the big book. I love the 12 step. It tells me exactly how to make the approach and tell that person about my drinking and all about me and how I'm sober today. So I love the book. Getting back to it was time for me to make my amends. I had my list. I went to Joe first, and we talked about our past and how we were different people today. And I went to my daughter. And she said, "That's okay, Mom." But she didn't even want to talk about it. And then I went to my mother. That long, long resentment. And I made my amends for not going home when I was drinking and not being with the family and letting her worry about me and all those things, being a brat. But I didn't feel any different. And I went to my sponsor and I said, I don't feel any different. I thought I was supposed to feel good about making amends. And I didn't feel good about my mother. And she said, "Phyllis, when you have a long, long-term resentment, you have to do a lot of extra work." She said, my mother lived in Wichita, Kansas. She said, "I want you to call your mother every Sunday. I want you to send her cards. And I want you to take her on trips." I thought, gosh, what an order. But I did that. And I don't know if it was 1 year or 2 years. My mother and I were in Eureka Springs, Arkansas, getting ready for bed. And I heard my mother for the first time. Not as I believe she was, not as I had judged her, but as she really was. I looked at her life and what she had gone through, losing my father when he was 47, having 4 kids at home, her house burning to the ground. She had nothing left. The community rebuilding her home. I looked at her life and the hard life she had had and the hurt and the pain. And it was like for the very first time I knew my mother. And from that day on, we had such a great, great relationship. She loved Joe, and Joe loved her, and we did a lot of trips and a lot of things together. Thank God I had listened to my sponsor and did the things I didn't want to do. And I was free of that resentment. And of course, there was a car. I never knew who I got that car from. I never knew. But I felt guilt and shame and remorse for the people I've hurt and the things I'd done and taken the car. There was a little guy in town named Woody, and he had a sober living house. I don't think it was called that then, but I started, I had a very generous allowance, and Joe had, so I started sending Woody a little money every now and then. And it felt good to think I was repaying somebody for that car. Maybe I was helping somebody out. And things were really good. We were going to meetings and everything was good. Very active in Alcoholics Anonymous in our group. We were picking people up at treatment centers, and we were doing a 2-hour meeting, doctor's opinion, first hour, solution, second hour. And in the other room, we would do the 12 and 12 in the big book. And we were just on fire. And the group was growing by leaps and bounds. And everything was beautiful, just beautiful. And Joe got involved in service, became active as a Oklahoma area chair and delegate. And we were in Burlington, Vermont, and Joe was rotating out as delegate. And I said, "What are you going to do now, Joe?" And he said, "I don't know, but I know it's going to be good." And we got home that Monday night, and Charlie called, and he said, Joe McClaney is going to take meetings into treatment centers and hospitals called Recovery Dynamics, and he's not going to be able to go out and do the big book. He said, "I was wondering if you would like to join me in doing the big book studies." And Joe started in 1990 going out with Charlie doing the big book studies. And for the next 16 years, that's what they did. And I don't believe they ever had a crossword. It was fabulous to see what they were doing. Occasionally I would, by this time I was working. Let me tell you what happened. You get a good allowance and you get those credit cards and you have all this time on your hands. Joe believed that you could buy anything you could pay for, but I started abusing the credit cards. And by this time, my sponsor was very ill, and I couldn't go with her with this. So after she passed, I got another sponsor, and I met her, and I told her the problem I was having. She said, "Well, you got to tell Joe." I said, "Oh my." Well, I told Joe, and it was as bad as I thought it was. And Joe said, "Well, I can't believe you've done that." But he said, "You're going to have to learn the meaning of money, and you're going to have to get a job." So he paid off my credit cards, closed my bank account, and I got a job. I was a collector. That's a whole story I could tell you about. I It was Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, and Missouri, and I couldn't even read a road map hardly. We didn't have that CSP stuff that we have now. But I learned because I just had a small allowance now. It was grocery money only. I learned how to handle money. Joe taught me so much that I resented and hated at the time, but it was just what I needed. And God has given me so many people, so many sponsors, so many teachers in my life to teach me what I needed to know. I love the big book too. You know, there was a time later that I got very, very depressed, like I was when I first came in. And I thought, what in the world is wrong? I went to my sponsor and I said, it's just like I know what they're going to say at my group. I'm working with others and I just feel like, is this all there is? And she said, "Well, Phyllis, sometimes when we pray, it feels like our prayers are bouncing off the wall." She said, "Just keep on keeping on." Well, it didn't change. It didn't go away. Maybe some of you have felt like this. Is this all there is? So I went and made an appointment with Charlie, and we sat down at the kitchen table. And I started telling him what I've told you, except Joe wasn't doing anything right either. And he said, "Phyllis, you're not working step 10. And I almost fell out of my chair because I'd gotten tired of looking at Phyllis, and I was taking everybody else's inventory and not my own. And he opened up the book and he said, "Now look at this. Our inventory is not it's a life a beginning of a lifetime process. And we don't quit taking inventory. When you feel out of sorts, you feel a resentment, you've taken their inventory, here's what you do. You work the steps 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Maybe I need to make amends. Maybe I need to talk to somebody about it. But you are not working step 10." And I had to really look at that. And I kind of made it like the 5 W's. Who am I aggravated at? Why? What basic instinct is threatened? What did I do, if anything, besides being judgmental, set the ball rolling? And where was I? Dishonest, selfish, inconsiderate? So I can do that today when I feel agitated with someone, irritated with someone. What is my part in it? Do I need to go to my sponsor? If I don't do that, and even this resentment will grow. If I do a good step 10, I don't think I have to go back and do a fourth step. That's just my opinion. 11, step 11 is a biggie. It tells me exactly what to do at night. I review my day. How did it go today? Was it a good day? Was I into self, or did I care about you? Did I try to help someone? And that's the way I try to live. I try to help other people. I love the way I sponsor people. Joe got very ill in 2006, and he got meningitis, and he lost part of his memory. He completely lost his hearing, and he was in intensive care for a long time, and he eventually got his hearing back, or got his memory back, never his hearing. And he didn't do big book studies anymore. That was in 2006. And he finally got it back, and we eventually got to going to meetings again and going to conferences. And he got cancer in 2012, and he passed in 2014. And I was very despondent and depressed, didn't want to do anything, didn't want to work with others. And this young lady come to meeting, and she'd been drinking, and she got my phone number, and later on she called me, and I started working with her, and we started in the book. And you know where it says, when all else fails, work with another alcoholic. It will save the day, and it certainly did. Not that I thought about drinking, but I was back into my grief and self. And she got me out of self, and she will celebrate, I believe, 9 years in April. So it's always getting out of self, working with others that saves the day. Back in the pandemic, my daughter came to me. I knew she had a drinking problem, and she said, "Mom, I need help." And she would have 4 years in April, and that just I didn't ever think she'd come to me, but I was so glad she did. It's been so gratifying to go to meetings with Gail and go to conferences and share this program. It's just been a delight in my life. It's added a new dimension to my sobriety. I go to 3 or 4 meetings a week. I go to conferences. We're going to one this next weekend. I'm not involved in service anymore. I did my deal as area chair and delegate, and I always treasure those moments. But now it's just being a member of my group and working the steps the best of my ability and appreciating all the wonderful memories I have. I have a lot of memories with Glenn and Jane. We went to Hawaii about 3 times and stayed with guests of Stan and Marion, and did the big book study and went to a couple of international conferences together. So I treasure our friendship and so many that I've met in Alcoholics Anonymous that's added to my life. And it's been a joy. And I'm just going to keep on keeping on. You know, we don't know what tomorrow holds, but we certainly know who holds it. I thank you for your attention and for having me. It's been a blessing for me, and I hope I've added to your day. Hope you have a great day. Thank you.